All right. So, welcome to the Brains and Banter podcast. We are so excited to have the very cool Joel Bakan with us. We're going to talk about his new documentary, The New Corporation, which is so awesome, a little depressing, but also uplifting. It kind of shows us like what we need to do, how fucked we are right now, and why that is, and how we approach it. So it's a wonderful, wonderful piece of work. He's written books too. I think my guess maybe the first question is, do you mind talking a little bit about your first documentary, The Corporation, and then how that led to The New Corporation?
Sure, yeah. I started to think about doing a film in the late 1990s. Some of you probably weren't born then, but it was a time of a lot of concern because for the first time, it really seemed that due to globalization and other dynamics, corporations were kind of competing with governments for governing society. That they had sort of developed this power and range and scope and transnational tentacles and all of that to the point where they really had to be understood as governing institutions. And so it was that kind of seed of an idea that led me to think. I mean, my day job is I'm a law professor, I'm a legal scholar. So I study corporations as a legal entity. We teach corporate law and learn about how corporations are put together by law and what sort of laws constrain them and enable them and all of that. But I started to think the institution really needed to be looked at not just as an economic or a legal institution, but a political institution, an ideological institution, a governing institution, and that we really needed to take a deep dive in it. So I started to work on that, and I had done psychology as an undergrad. And there I learned about psychopaths, and I learned that psychopaths were incapable of caring for others, that they were profoundly self-interested, and that's all they could care about was their own self-interest, and that they victimized others, manipulated others, exploited others in order to serve their needs. And then when I went to law school and I was learning about corporations, I learned that the fundamental operating principle was that corporations always had to serve their own best interests, meaning to make money for the shareholders that constituted them. I thought, and I also learned a second thing in law school about corporations, and that is that the law recognizes them as persons. And so I thought, okay, well, here we've recognized this thing as a person, and we've imbued it with a personality that, if in a human being, would be psychopathic. And so that idea combined with this notion that we had to really look at corporations as political governing institutions, those two ideas came together. I started to do an academic project on it. I then met Mark Achbar, who's a filmmaker, at a social event. We started talking, and one thing led to another. We started collaborating on a film. And the book that I was writing, I kind of turned into more of a popular book than a strictly academic book. And, in 2003, we released the book and the film. And then nearly 20 years later, we released the second book and film.
Amazing. And do you feel like it's this time is having more of an impact? Like, do you think that this climate right now and the climate crisis is sort of a good time to release something like that to wake people up? Is that kind of your intention with it?
Yeah, I mean, my intention with all my work is to wake people up. And I think the first book and film, did a reasonably good job of that. They ended up sort of translated into 25 different languages. They played all over the place, mainstream theaters around the world. The book became a bestseller in Italy and in the United Kingdom. So, they got out there. They had an impact. They were reckoned with by the targets of criticism, the corporate world. I mean, The Economist magazine talked about them. So, they did have an impact, but I think that they didn't have enough of an impact, obviously, because 10 years later, when I thought it was important to start doing a sequel, corporations were bigger, corporations were more powerful, climate change was worse, social injustice, racial injustice, by every measure, all the problems that corporations cause and contribute to were worse, and they were bigger, and they were more powerful, and they were more governing institutions, and even sort of more problematic. They'd convinced us that they were the good guys now, that they were sustainable, that they were socially responsible, that they were going to save the world. So all of that together is why I thought it was necessary to make a sequel, but unfortunately necessary, because obviously the first film and the first book didn't do the job. Everything got worse after. So they may have promoted some consciousness, but it didn't really change anything. And the second book and film, it's still too early to tell what kind of an impact they're going to have. They're out there. The book is with a major publisher, Penguin Random House. It's, out in the world, and the film is being distributed. But these are difficult times to release projects because of the pandemic. Theaters are closed, for example. Typically, a film like this gets a lot of buzz and publicity because it opens in theaters. Well, we couldn't open in theaters. So that's a problem. And there's less of an appetite in this pandemic for people to engage with serious ideas for obvious reasons. People are looking for sort of Netflix escapism, and I'm not criticizing them. I am myself. That's the nature of the times, is you don't want to sort of deal with all the heaviness and then go and watch a film like this that, as you pointed out, can be kind of depressing. So, I think it is a very ripe time. I think the message is more important than ever, because we're teetering on the brink of existential crises, of inequality, of climate, of democracy, so many dimensions. The world really needs to take a closer look, and hopefully the film and book will help them do that. But yeah, I mean, tell your friends to watch the film, tell them to read the book.
We're going to show it at our World Forum too. So we have a World Forum redesigning our world taking place in September 2020. So we're going to show the film, and Joel do a little interview with us again.
Absolutely.
So, happy to.
I'm looking forward to watching the film. Sounds incredible. Good. And I find it interesting that you say that the impact may have been an increase in, or on a conscious level, we understood it, because, to be honest with you, it's a concept that for some reason I have known. It seems like for my entire life that it's been part of a conversation, this comparison between the psychopath and corporation. And it's something that I talk about with my mates, and that must be no doubt from your first film. I just didn't know that that's where it came from.
Well, that's good.
So that's really interesting.
That's nice.
Yeah. I had a thought, actually, when you were talking about the story, about how you came to this from studying psychology. When you were studying psychology, I didn't understand really how the course works, your undergrad degree. Did you learn at all how psychopaths are treated, and how we can manage those symptoms?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a great question. Go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was just wondering if the kind of analogy for that crosses over.
Yes, absolutely. What you learn about psychopaths and sociopaths, and what people talk about as sort of social types of those kinds of disorders, antisocial disorders, is that, at least in the acute cases where people really have an inability to empathize, to sympathize, to care at all, to feel anything for other people, and to feel the empathy for the pain that they feel when you inflict it on them as a psychopath. Like that, those really acute cases, typically the prognosis is that they can't be cured, that you can't actually change them, but you have to manage them. And obviously a corporation is different in the sense that, sort of like Frankenstein's monster, we've created it. So it doesn't have an inherent personality disorder. Its personality disorder is one that we as a society through our governments and through our laws, have imbued it with. And so it's tempting to say, well, let's just stop doing that. Let's change its character into something different. And it's a long sort of argument, and it's one that is much easier. I deal with it in detail in the book, because it's something in books you can kind of go into more analysis and stuff that you can't do in a film. But the problem with saying we should just change the nature of the corporation is that the way that capitalism works today is entirely dependent on corporations being the way they are. So we've created a financial and an economic system that depends upon corporations being psychopathic. And to put it in less sort of hubris terms, if corporations were to stop being self-interested, if they were to say, hey, we're going to be nicer, better in the world, and we're going to give our shareholders less money, we're going to take their investments, and we're not going to provide returns because we're going to be busy saving the world and protecting the environment, capitalism would grind to a halt in about 3 days. All the banks would fail. Everything would just, nothing would work anymore.
They would stop being corporations, right?
Well, they would stop being corporations as we know them, and capitalism would stop being capitalism as we know it. So that's not necessarily a bad thing. That might be a good thing, but it's a thing that's not going to happen tomorrow. And it's a thing that requires a much broader struggle in the streets about democracy than just saying, hey, why don't we just go in and tinker with the DNA of the corporation and everything will be fine? No, that can't happen. So to that extent, I kind of treat the corporation in the way that medicine treats psychopaths, which is that, well, its character is probably not going to change. So what we need to do, at least in the short and medium term, is manage it. And what does management mean? That means democracy has to take control of it and manage it. And democratic governments and democratic communities and worker co-ops and whatever we want to however we want to create the world where democracy is real, has to see the corporation as potentially a tool that can help organize production and raise investment capital and all of that, but as a tool for the public good and for the social good. Right now, we're the tools of it. So we need to flip that around, and it needs to be a tool for good governance. That, like a lawnmower, it's a tool that has limits. You don't want to use a lawnmower to cut your hair or to make your smoothie in the morning, just like you don't want to use a corporation to run your schools or your water systems. And just like a lawnmower, a corporation can be dangerous. It's got blades, it makes noise, you need to regulate it. You need to ensure that it stays in its lane, that it doesn't cause more harm than good. So that's kind of my very pragmatic, non-idealistic and utopian approach to this. And it's not that much different than, if you look at some kind of leading leftist mainstream politicians today, like AOC in the United States or Bernie Sanders, they would probably say something quite similar to what I'm saying. None of them were saying we're going to get rid of capitalism and corporations tomorrow. But they come up with, a Green New Deal that substantially regulates corporations, that promotes co-ops instead of corporations, that promotes values of environment and social good and all of that, to kind of put them in their place and see them as the tools that they were originally created to be, rather than us as their tools. That was a long answer.
Oh,
it was a big question.
It makes me think too of Hervey Cleckley's The Mask of Sanity, this idea of the psychopath having this mask of charm. And then again, it goes with the greenwashing, all that stuff, under which they're concealing this, desire to get ahead. And so corporations like psychopaths don't sort of function under the restraints of constraints of society, which is so scary, right? And I think it's so interesting that you've looked at like the mindset of a psychopath beside a corporation, and we're learning so much from that. And I think it's also really interesting you talk about the treatment, Anna, and how we manage it. And like you say, like with psychopathy, it's damage to the amygdala, which is the fear center of the brain. So again, there's in that fear of hurting people or others, just like the corporation, right? So they don't have to worry about it. They just want to get ahead. And and they're saying like the only treatment for psychopathy in the future could be through like a form of medication like that, which treats depression. But like you say, for now, it's like having to regulate, and also just like, I think what you've done is made people aware of the psychopathic personality and how we can't be duped by it, because we're gonna right now we might be duped by that creative capitalism of Bill Gates, right? And so also that awareness is so key, I think.
Yeah, and I think, the central point of this new project, and the reason why it's called the New Corporation, is to get at that idea that what has happened between the two projects, from the first Psychopath to the second, is that the psychopath found charm. That psychopaths understand that they are most effective in serving their own interest when they are least visible as psychopaths. So when they wear a veneer of charm. And so what this film and book are all about is this discovery around 2005, 2006, that corporations could gain much more power, much more easily, and much more control, and push governments back even further and push democracy back even further if they appeared and presented themselves as good guys, as caring, genuinely caring about society. And that is really what this project is aimed at debunking. Because that is really what's changed over the last 20 years. When we made the first film, of course, people talked in the early 2000s about social responsibility and all that, but it was always a kind of peripheral conversation. It was always like, our main thing is to make money. And, we've got these programs in Kenya or wherever else, and we're trying to do a little bit of good. Now, when you go to the websites of McDonald's or of Nike or of British Petroleum or Exxon, any major transnational company, the first page is all about the good they're doing in the world. It's like you've accidentally hit a button for Greenpeace or the United Nations. It's all about how they're trying to save the world. And so we've gone from, in the early 2000s, corporations saying, a bit of social responsibility is a good thing, to corporations saying now our fundamental mission is social. Our fundamental mission is environmental. And that's what we reveal and debunk in the film. It's basically a zombie film. That's how I structured it, that the first act is all about, you're in the town in a typical zombie film where everything is great. The paper person sort of throws the paper onto the porch across the white picket fence, and all is bucolic and nice, and all the people that you see are nice. The barber, the butcher, the candlestick maker, they're all, really nice and sweet and good people. The second act, you find out that a lot of them are flesh-eating zombies that are masquerading as human beings, and that they're destroying the town and eating all the people. And it's horrible and awful and everything else. The third act, there's a small group of survivors, human survivors, who have managed not to be eaten by the flesh-eating zombies, and they're hiding out in a basement somewhere. And they're like, what are we going to do? And they decide, we're going to resist, we're going to go out there and we're going to defeat the zombies and we're going to retake the town. And that's the film. It is a zombie film. The first film was a monster film. This film is a zombie film. And it's a zombie film because we have that first act now. We have the corporations masquerading as good entities. And you'll see in the film that the survivors are the children who are protesting climate change, the indigenous people who are protesting colonialism. Those are the survivors who are standing up, the AOCs of the world. So that's all in the film. I don't want to give too much away. But as a writer of nonfiction, it's like, I think the great writers always go back to the sort of archetypical plots and the archetypical structures. A lot of novels are just remakes of a Shakespearean story. Most novels, there are like only 22 plots out there, and so when I'm thinking in the first film, which I wrote, I didn't direct it, I wrote it and book. I was thinking more the corporation as a monster. It was more the Frankenstein idea, the idea that we are Dr. Frankenstein. We created this monster to try to do something, and then the monster took over and basically, squeezed the life out of us who created it. So it was a Frankenstein story. In this film, because of this new shift of corporations into saying they're good now, the zombie metaphor made a lot more sense.